Hi, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we're reading from Kidnapped, chapters 19 and 20. Chapter 19, The House of Fear. Night fell as we were walking, and the clouds, which had broken up in the afternoon, settled in and thickened, so that it fell, for the season of the year, extremely dark. The way we went was over rough mountainsides, and though Alan pushed on with an assured manner, I could by no means see how he directed himself. At last, about 10:30 of the clock, we came to the top of a brae and saw lights below us. It seemed a house door stood open and let out a beam of fire and candlelight, and all round the house and steading 5 or 6 persons were moving hurriedly about, each carrying a lighted brand. "James must have tint his wits," said Alan. "If this was the soldiers instead of you and me, he would be in a bonny mess. But I dare say he'll have a sentry on the road, and he would ken well enough no soldier would find the way that we came." Hereupon he whistled 3 times, in a particular manner. It was strange to see how, at the first sound of it, all the moving torches came to a stand, as if the bearers were affrighted, and how, at the third, the bustle began again as before. Having thus set folks' minds at rest, we came down the brae and were met at the yard gate, for this place was like a well-doing farm, by a tall, handsome man of more than 50, who cried out to Alan in the Gaelic. "James Stewart," said Alan, "I will ask you to speak in Scotch, for here's a young gentleman with me that has nane of the other. This is him," he added, putting his arm through mine, "a young gentleman of the Lowlands, and a laird in his country too, but I am thinking it will be the better for his health if we give his name the go-by." James of the Glens turned to me for a moment and greeted me courteously enough. The next he had turned to Alan. "This has been a dreadful accident," he cried. "It will bring trouble on the country," and he wrung his hands. "Hoots," said Alan, "you must take the sour with the sweet, man. Colin Roy is dead, and be thankful for that." "Aye," said James, "and by my troth I wish he was alive again. It's all very fine to blow and boast beforehand, but now it's done, Alan, and who's to bear the wyte of it? The accident fell out in Appin. Mind ye that, Alan, it's Appin that must pay, and I am a man that has a family." While this was going on, I looked about me at the servants. Some were on ladders, digging in the thatch of the house or the farm buildings, from which they brought out guns, swords, and different weapons of war. Others carried them away, and by the sound of mattock blows from somewhere farther down the brae, I suppose they buried them. Though they were all so busy, there prevailed no kind of order in their efforts. Men struggled together for the same gun and ran into each other with their burning torches, and James was continually turning about from his talk with Alan to cry out orders which were apparently never understood. The faces in the torchlight were like those of people overborne with hurry and panic, and though none spoke above his breath, their speech sounded both anxious and angry. It was about this time that a lassie came out of the house carrying a pack of bundle, and it has often made me smile to think how Alan's instinct awoke at the mere sight of it. "What's that the lassie has in her hand?" he asked. "We're just setting the house in order, Alan," said James in his frightened and somewhat fawning way. "They'll search Appin with candles, and we must have all things straight. We're digging the bit guns and swords into the moss, you see, and these, I am thinking, will be your ain French clothes. We'll be to bury them, I believe." "Bury my French clothes!" cried Alan. "Troth, not," and he laid a hold upon the packet and retired into the barn to shift himself, recommending me in the meanwhile to his kinsman. James carried me accordingly into the kitchen and sat down with me at table, smiling and talking at first in a very hospitable manner. But presently the gloom returned upon him. He sat frowning and biting his fingers, only remembered me from time to time, and then gave me but a word or two and a poor smile, and back into his private terrors. His wife sat by the fire and wept, with her face in her hands. His eldest son was crouched upon the floor, running over a great mass of papers, and now and again setting one alight and burning it to the bitter end. All the while a servant lass with a red face was rummaging about the room in a blind hurry of fear, and whimpering as she went, and every now and again one of the men would thrust in his face from the yard and cry for orders. At last James could keep his seat no longer, and begged my permission to be so unmannerly as to walk about. "I am but poor company altogether, sir," says he, "but I can't think of nothing but this dreadful accident and the trouble it is like to bring upon quite innocent persons." A little after he observed his son burning a paper, which he thought should have been kept, and at that his excitement burst out so that it was painful to witness. He struck the lad repeatedly. "Are you gone gite?" he cried. "Do you wish to hang your father?" And forgetful of my presence, carried on at him a long time in the Gaelic, the young man answering nothing, only the wife, at the name of hanging, throwing her apron over her face and sobbing louder than before. This was all wretched for a stranger like myself to hear and see, and I was right glad when Allan returned, looking like himself in his fine French clothes, though to be sure they were now grown almost too battered and withered to deserve the name of fine. I was then taken out in my turn by another of the sons, and given that change of clothing of which I had stood so long in need, and a pair of Highland brogues made of deer leather, rather strange at first, but after a little practice very easy to the feet. By the time I came back, Allan must have told his story, for it seemed understood that I was to fly with him, and they were all busy upon our equipment. They gave us each a sword and pistols, though I professed my inability to use the former, and with these and some ammunition, a bag of oatmeal, an iron pan, and a bottle of right French brandy, we were ready for the heather. Money, indeed, was lacking. I had about 2 guineas left. Allan's belt having been dispatched by another hand, that trusty messenger had no more than 17 pence to his whole fortune, and as for James, it appears he had brought himself so low with journeys to Edinburgh and legal expenses on behalf of the tenants, that he could only scrape together 3 and 5 pence halfpenny, the most of it in coppers. "This'll no do," said Allan. "You must find a safe bit somewhere nearby," said James, "and get word sent to me. You see, you'll have to get this business prettily off, Allan. This is no time to be stayed for a guinea or two. They're sure to get wind of you, sure to seek ye, and by my way of it, sure to lay on you the white of this day's accident. If it falls on you, it falls on me, that am your near kinsman, and harbored ye while you were in the country. And if it comes on me," he paused and bit his fingers with a white face, "it would be a painful thing for our friends if I was to hang," said he. "It would be an ill day for Appin," says Allan. "It's a day that sticks in my throat," said James. "Oh, man, 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 Allan, you and me have spoken like 2 fools," he cried, striking his hand upon the wall so that the house rang again. "Well, and that's true too," said Allan, "and my friend from the Lowlands here," nodding at me, "gave me a good word upon that head if I would only have listened to him." "But see here," said James, returning to his former manner, "if they lay me by the heels, Allan, it's then that you'll be needing the money. For with all that I have said and all that you have said, it will look very black against the 2 of us. Do you mark that? Well, follow me out, and you'll see that I'll have to get a paper out against you myself. I'll have to offer a reward for you. Aye, I will. It's a sore thing to do between such near friends, but if I get the durden of this dreadful accident, I'll have to fend for myself, man. Do you see that?" He spoke with a pleading earnestness, taking Allan by the breast of the coat. "Aye," said Allan, "I see that. And you'll have to be clear of the country, Allan, aye, and clear of Scotland. You and your friend from the Lowlands, too. For I'll have to paper your friend from the Lowlands. You see that, Allan? Say that you see that." I thought Allan flushed a bit. "This is unco hard on me that brought him here, James," said he, throwing his head back. "It's like making me a traitor." "Now, Allan, man," cried James, "look things in the face. He'll be papered anyway. Mungo Campbell'll be sure to paper him. What matters if I paper him too? And then, Allan, I am a man that has a family." And then, after a pause on both sides, "And, Allan, it'll be a jury of Campbells," said he. "There's one thing," said Allan musingly, "that nobody kens his name." "Nor yet they shallna, Allan. There's my hand on that," cried James, for all the world as if he had really known my name and was foregoing some advantage. "But just the habit he was in, and what he looked like, and his age, and the like, I couldna well do less." "I wonder at your father's son," cried Allan sternly. "Would you sell the lad with a gift? Would you change his clothes and then betray him?" "No, no, Allan," said James. "No, no, the habit he took off, the habit Mungo saw him in." But I thought he seemed crestfallen. Indeed, he was clutching at every straw, and all the time, I dare say, saw the faces of his hereditary foes on the bench and in the jury box, and the gallows in the background. "Well, sir," says Allan, turning to me, "what say you to that? Ye are here under the safeguard of my honor, and it's my part to see nothing done but what shall please you." "I have but one word to say," said I, "for to all this dispute I am a perfect stranger. But the plain common sense is to set the blame where it belongs, and that is on the man that fired the shot. Paper him, as you call it, set the hunt on him, and let honest, innocent folks show their faces in safety." But at this both Alan and James cried out in horror, bidding me hold my tongue, for that was not to be thought of, and asking me what the Camerons would think, which confirmed me it must have been a Cameron from Mamore that did the act, and if I did not see that the lad might be caught. "Ye havena surely thought of that?" said they, with such innocent earnestness that my hands dropped at my side, and I despaired of argument. "Very well, then," said I, "paper me, if you please, paper Alan, paper King George. We're all three innocent, and that seems to be what's wanted. But at least, sir," said I to James, recovering from my little fit of annoyance, "I am Alan's friend, and if I can be helpful to friends of his, I will not stumble at the risk." I thought it best to put a fair face on my consent, for I saw Alan troubled, and besides, thinks I to myself, as soon as my back is turned they will paper me, as they call it, whether I consent or not. But in this I saw I was wrong, for I had no sooner said the words than Mrs. Stewart leaped out of her chair, came running over to us, and wept first upon my neck and then on Alan's, blessing God for our goodness to her family. "As for you, Alan, it was no more than your bounden duty," she said, "but for this lad that has come here and seen us at our worst, and seen the goodman fleeching like a suitor, him that by rights should give his commands like any king. As for you, my lad," she says, "my heart is way not to have your name, but I have your face, and as long as my heart beats under my bosom, I will keep it and think of it and bless it." And with that she kissed me, and burst once more into such sobbing that I stood abashed. "Hoot, hoot," said Alan, looking mighty silly. "The day comes unco soon in this month of July, and tomorrow there will be a fine to-do in Appin, a fine riding of dragoons, and crying of Cruachan, and running of redcoats, and it behoves you and me to the sooner be gone." Thereupon we said farewell and set out again, bending somewhat eastwards in a fine, mild, dark night, and over much the same broken country as before. Chapter 20. The Flight in the Heather. The Rocks. Sometimes we walked, sometimes ran, and as it drew on to morning we walked ever the less and ran the more. Though upon its face that country appeared to be a desert, yet there were huts and houses of the people, of which we must have passed more than 20, hidden in quiet places of the hills. When we came to one of these, Alan would leave me in the way and go himself and rap upon the side of the house and speak a while at the window with some sleeper awakened. This was to pass the news, which in that country was so much of a duty that Alan must pause to attend to it, even while fleeing for his life, and so well attended to by others that in more than half of the houses where we called, they had heard already of the murder. In the others, as well as I could make out, standing back at a distance and hearing a strange tongue, the news was received with more of consternation than surprise. For all our hurry, day began to come in while we were still far from any shelter. It found us in a prodigious valley strewn with rocks and where ran a foaming river. Wild mountains stood around it. There grew neither grass nor trees, and I have sometimes thought since then that it may have been the valley called Glencoe where the massacre was in the time of King William. But for the details of our itinerary I am all to seek, our way lying now by shortcuts, now by great detours, our pace being so hurried, our time of journeying usually by night, and the names of such places as I asked and heard being in the Gaelic tongue and the more easily forgotten. The first peep of morning, then, showed us this horrible place, and I could see Alan knit his brow. "This is no fit place for you and me," he said. "This is a place they're bound to watch." And with that he ran harder than ever down to the waterside in a part where the river was split in two among 3 rocks. It went through with a horrid thundering that made my belly quake, and there hung over the Lynn a little mist of spray. Alan looked neither to the right nor to the left, but jumped clean upon the middle rock and fell there on his hands and knees to check himself, for that rock was small, and he might have pitched over on the far side. I had scarce time to measure the distance or to understand the peril before I had followed him, and he had caught and stopped me. So there we stood, side by side, upon a small rock slippery with spray, a far broader leap in front of us, and the river dinning upon all sides. When I saw where I was, there came on me a deadly sickness of fear, and I put my hand over my eyes. Alan took me and shook me. I saw he was speaking, but the roaring of the falls and the trouble of my mind prevented me from hearing. Only I saw his face was red with anger, and that he stamped upon the rock. The same look showed me the water raging by and the mist hanging in the air, and with that I covered my eyes again and shuddered. The next minute Alan had set the brandy bottle to my lips and forced me to drink about a gill, which sent the blood into my head again. Then, putting his hands to his mouth and his mouth to my ear, he shouted, "Hang or drown!" and turning his back upon me, leaped over the farther branch of the stream and landed safe. I was now alone upon the rock, which gave me the more room. The brandy was singing in my ears. I had this good example fresh before me, and just wit enough to see that if I did not leap at once, I should never leap at all. I bent low on my knees and flung myself forth with that kind of anger of despair that has sometimes stood me instead of courage. Sure enough, it was but my hands that reached the full length. These slipped, caught again, slipped again, and I was slittering back into the Lynn when Alan seized me, first by the hair, then by the collar, and with a great strain dragged me into safety. Never a word, he said, but set off running again for his life, and I must stagger to my feet and run after him. I had been weary before, but now I was sick and bruised, and partly drunken with the brandy. I kept stumbling as I ran. I had a stitch that came near to overmaster me, and when at last Alan paused under a great rock that stood there among a number of others, it was none too soon for David Balfour. A great rock, I had said, but by right it was two rocks leaning together at the top, both some 20 feet high and at the first sight inaccessible. Even Alan, though you may say he had as good as 4 hands, failed twice in an attempt to climb them, and it was only at the third trial, and then by standing on my shoulders and leaping up with such force as I thought must have broken my collarbone, that he secured a lodgment. Once there, he let down his leathern girdle, and with the aid of that and a pair of shallow footholds in the rock, I scrambled up beside him. Then I saw why he had come there, for the 2 rocks, being both somewhat hollow on the top and sloping one to the other, made a kind of dish or saucer where as many as 3 or 4 men might have lain hidden. All this while Alan had not said a word, and had run and climbed with such a savage, silent frenzy of hurry, that I knew that he was in mortal fear of some miscarriage. Even now we were on the rock, he said nothing, nor so much as relaxed the frowning look upon his face, but clapped flat down, and keeping only one eye above the edge of our place of shelter, scouted all round the compass. The dawn had come quite clear. We could see the stony sides of the valley and its bottom, which was bestrewed with rocks, and the river, which went from one side to another and made white falls, but nowhere the smoke of a house, nor any living creature but some eagles screaming round a cliff. Then at last Alan smiled. "Aye," said he, "now we have a chance." And then looking at me with some amusement, "You're no very gleg at the jumping," he said. At this I suppose I colored with mortification, for he added at once, "Hoots, small blame to you. To be feared of a thing and yet to do it is what makes the prettiest kind of a man." And then there was water there, and water's a thing that dauntens even me. "No, no," said Alan, "it's no you that's to blame, it's me." I asked him why. "Why," he said, "I have proved myself a gomeril this night. For first of all I take a wrong road, and that in my own country of Appin, so that the day has caught us where we should never have been, and thanks to that, we lie here in some danger and mere discomfort. And next, which is the worst of the two, for a man that has been so much among the heather as myself, I have come wanting a water bottle, and here we lie for a long summer's day with nothing but neat spirit. You may think that a small matter, but before it comes night, David, you'll give me news of it." I was anxious to redeem my character, and offered, if he would pour out the brandy, to run down and fill the bottle at the river. "I wouldna waste the good spirit either," says he. "It's been a good friend to you this night, or in my poor opinion, you would still be cocking on yon stone. And what's mair," says he, "you may have observed, you that's a man of so much penetration, that Alan Breck Stewart was perhaps walking quicker than is ordinary." "You," I cried, "you were running fit to burst." "Was I so?" said he. "Well then, you may depend upon it, there was nae time to be lost. And now here is enough said. Gang you to your sleep, lad, and I'll watch." Accordingly, I lay down to sleep. A little peaty earth had drifted in between the top of the 2 rocks, and some bracken grew there to be a bed to me. The last thing I heard was still the crying of the eagles. I dare say it would be 9 in the morning when I was roughly awakened and found Alan's hand pressed upon my mouth. "Wheesht," he whispered, "you were snoring." "Well," said I, surprised at his anxious and dark face, "and why not?" He peered over the edge of the rock and signed to me to do the like. It was now high day, cloudless and very hot. The valley was as clear as in a picture. About half a mile up the water was a camp of redcoats. A big fire blazed in their midst, at which some were cooking, and nearby, on the top of a rock about as high as ours, there stood a sentry with the sun sparkling on his arms. All the way down the riverside were posted other sentries, here near together, there widely or scattered, some planted like the first on places of command, some on the ground level and marching and countermarching so as to meet halfway. Higher up the glen, where the ground was more open, the chain of posts was continued by horse soldiers, whom we could see in the distance riding to and fro. Lower down, the infantry continued, but as the stream suddenly swelled by the confluence of a considerable burn, they were more widely set and only watched the fords and stepping stones. I took but one look at them and ducked again into my place. It was strange indeed to see this valley, which had lain so solitary in the hour of dawn, bristling with arms and dotted with the redcoats and breeches. "You see," said Allan, "this is what I was afraid of, Davy, that they would watch the Burnside. They began to come in about 2 hours ago, and man, but you're a grand hand at the sleeping. We're in a narrow place. If they get up the sides of the hill, they could easy spy us with the glass. But if they'll only keep in the foot of the valley, we'll do yet. The posts are thinner down the water, and come night we'll try our hand at getting by them." "And what are we to do till night?" I asked. "Lie here," says he, "and bursel." That one good Scotch word, bursel, was indeed the most of the story of the day that we had now to pass. You are to remember that we lay on the bare top of a rock, like scones upon a girdle. The sun beat upon us cruelly. The rock grew so heated a man could scarce endure the touch of it, and the little patch of earth and fern which kept cooler was only large enough for one at a time. We took turn about to lie on the naked rock, which was indeed like the position of that saint that was martyred on a gridiron, and it ran in my mind how strange it was that in the same climate, and at only a few days' distance, I should have suffered so cruelly, first from cold upon my island, and now from heat upon this rock. All the while we had no water, only raw brandy for a drink, which was worse than nothing. But we kept the bottle as cool as we could, burying it in the earth, and got some relief by bathing our breasts and temples. The soldiers kept stirring all day in the bottom of the valley, now changing guard, now in patrolling parties hunting among the rocks. These lay round in so great a number that to look for men among them was like looking for a needle in a bottle of hay, and being so hopeless a task, it was gone about with less care. Yet we could see the soldiers pike their bayonets among the heather, which sent a cold thrill through my vitals, and they would sometimes hang about our rock so that we scarce dared to breathe. It was in this way that I first heard the right English speech. One fellow, as he went by, actually clapping his hand upon the sunny face of the rock on which we lay, and plucking it off again with an oath. "I tell you it's odd," he says, and I was amazed at the clipping tones and the odd sing-song in which he spoke, and no less at that strange trick of dropping out the letter H. To be sure, I had heard Ransom, but he had taken his ways from all sorts of people, and spoke so imperfectly at the best that I set down the most of it to childishness. My surprise was all the greater to hear that manner of speaking in the mouth of a grown man, and indeed I have never grown used to it, nor yet altogether with the English grammar, as perhaps a very critical eye might here and there spy out even in these memoirs. The tediousness and pain of these hours upon the rock grew only the greater as the day went on, the rock getting still the hotter and the sun fiercer. There were giddiness and sickness and sharp pangs like rheumatism to be supported. I minded them, and have often minded since, on the lines in our Scotch psalm, "The moon by night thee shall not smite, nor yet the sun by day." And indeed it was only by God's blessing that we neither of us were sun-smitten. At last, about 2, it was beyond men's bearing, and there was now temptation to resist, as well as pain to thole. For the sun being now got a little into the west, there came a patch of shade on the east side of our rock, which was a side sheltered from the soldiers. "As well one death as another," said Allan, and slipped over the edge and dropped on the ground on the shadowy side. I followed him at once, and instantly fell all my length, so weak was I and so giddy with that long exposure. Here, then, we lay for an hour or two, aching from head to foot, as weak as water, and lying quite naked to the eye of any soldier who should have strolled that way. None came, however, all passing by on the other side, so that our rock continued to be our shield even in this new position. Presently we began again to get a little strength, and as the soldiers were now lying closer along the riverside, Allan proposed that we should try a start. I was by this time afraid of but one thing in the world, and that was to be set back upon the rock. Anything else was welcome to me, so we got ourselves at once in marching order, and began to slip from rock to rock, one after the other, now crawling flat on our bellies in the shade, now making a run for it, heart in mouth. The soldiers, having searched this side of the valley after a fashion, and being perhaps somewhat sleepy with the sultriness of the afternoon, had now laid by much of their vigilance, and stood dozing at their posts, or only kept a lookout along the banks of the river, so that in this way, keeping down the valley and at the same time toward the mountains, we drew steadily away from their neighborhood. But the business was the most wearing I had ever taken part in. A man had need of 100 eyes in every part of him to keep concealed in that uneven country, and within cry of so many and scattered sentries. When we must pass an open place, quickness was not all, but a swift judgment not only of the lie of the whole country, but of the solidity of every stone on which we must set foot. For the afternoon was now fallen so breathless that the rolling of a pebble sounded abroad like a pistol shot, and would start the echo calling among the hills and cliffs. By sundown we had made some distance, even by our slow rate of progress, though to be sure the sentry on the rock was still plainly in our view. But now we came on something that put all fears out of season, and that was a deep rushing burn that tore down in that part to join the Glen River. At the sight of this we cast ourselves on the ground and plunged head and shoulders in the water, and I cannot tell which was the more pleasant, the great shock as the cool stream went over us, or the greed with which we drank of it. We lay there, for the banks hid us, drank again and again, bathed our chests, let our wrists trail in the running water till they ached with the chill, and at last, being wonderfully renewed, we got out the meal bag and made drammach in the iron pan. This, though it is but cold water mingled with oatmeal, yet makes a good enough dish for a hungry man, and where there are no means of making fire, or, as in our case, good reason for not making one, it is the chief standby of those who have taken to the heather. As soon as the shadow of the night had fallen, we set forth again, at first with the same caution, but presently with more boldness, standing our full height and stepping out at a good pace of walking. The way was very intricate, lying up the steep sides of mountains and along the brows of cliffs. Clouds had come in with the sunset, and the night was dark and cool, so that I walked without much fatigue, but in continual fear of falling and rolling down the mountains, and with no guess at our direction. The moon rose at last, and found us still on the road. It was in its last quarter, and was long beset with clouds, but after a while shone out and showed me many dark heads of mountains, and was reflected far underneath us on the narrow arm of a sea loch. At this sight we both paused. I struck with wonder to find myself so high and walking, as it seemed to me, upon clouds. Alan to make sure of his direction. Seemingly he was well pleased, and he must certainly have judged us out of earshot of all our enemies, for throughout the rest of our night march he beguiled the way with whistling of many tunes, warlike, merry, plaintive, tunes that made the foot go faster, tunes of my own south country that made me fain to be home from my adventures, and all these on the great dark desert mountains, making company upon the way. That's it for today. Tomorrow we'll start with chapter 21. Thank you for watching and listening. Bye-bye.